Tonight, we journey into the shadows, unraveling stories of terrifying encounters with entities from realms beyond. If you think you're brave enough, join us as we delve into accounts that defy logic and chill the soul. But beware! Each tale serves as a haunting reminder that some doors should remain closed. Title: Whispers Beyond Time. James Tanaka's mornings were predictable. The soft hum of the coffee machine, the rustle of a newspaper, and the quiet pitter-patter of his daughter Emily's feet as she wandered into the kitchen clutching her stuffed rabbit. Aiko, his wife, would hum as she made breakfast, her gentle voice blending with the clinks and clatters of daily life. Their home in Seattle was modest but cozy. The walls were lined with photographs, mostly of Emily, who had become the heart of their small family. At 3 years old, she was bright, curious, and talkative, a child who seemed to absorb the world like a sponge. But lately, Emily's chatter had taken an unusual turn. "Grandma says to eat all your rice," she chirped one morning, her small hands gripping the edge of the dining table. James looked up from his coffee. "Grandma?" Emily nodded, her expression serious. "She sits next to me when I eat. She says I'm a good girl." Aiko froze mid-step. "Emily? Which grandma are you talking about?" "Your mommy," Emily said matter-of-factly. Aiko's face paled. Her mother, Miko, had passed away long before Emily was born. The room grew uncomfortably silent, the clatter of a spoon on ceramic echoing louder than it should. James chuckled nervously, trying to dismiss the moment. "Kids and their imaginary friends," he muttered. But Aiko didn't laugh. She stared at Emily, her lips pressed into a thin line. Over the following weeks, Emily's comments grew more unsettling. "Grandma likes my dress," she said one evening, twirling in front of the mirror. "She told me a story about when she was a little girl," she whispered another night as James tucked her into bed. James brushed it off as typical childhood imagination, but Aiko couldn't shake the unease. Her mother's death had been sudden, a heart attack while tending to the family temple in Kyoto. Aiko hadn't spoken much about it, not even to James. One day, Emily's preschool teacher called. "She's been talking about Japan a lot," the teacher said. "She told the class a story about a temple and something about cupboards. Does that mean anything to you?" Aiko's hands trembled as she hung up the phone. That evening, she confronted James. Is it possible that Emily could know things she shouldn't?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Aiko, she's 3. Kids say weird things all the time. You're reading too much into this." But Aiko couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. When Aiko's father invited them to visit Kyoto for Obon, the annual festival honoring ancestors, she hesitated. Memories of her mother's funeral and the unspoken grief that lingered between her and her father made the idea daunting. Emily, however, was thrilled. "We're going to see Grandma," she exclaimed, bouncing on the couch. The flight to Japan was uneventful, but the moment they arrived at Aiko's family home, Emily's demeanor changed. She walked through the house as if she had been there before, pointing out rooms and objects with uncanny familiarity. "This is where Grandma keeps her tea," she said, opening a cabinet that hadn't been touched in years. Aiko's father, Hiroshi, was stunned. "How does she know that?" he whispered to Aiko. "I don't know," Aiko replied, her voice trembling. The family visited the temple on the second day of their trip. Emily was unusually quiet during the car ride, her eyes fixed on the passing scenery. As they entered the temple grounds, she suddenly became animated. "Grandma is here," she shouted, running ahead. James and Aiko hurried after her, calling her name. Emily stopped in front of the main hall, pointing at a faded wooden cupboard along the wall. "She's in there," Emily said, her voice firm. Aiko's heart pounded as she approached the cupboard. It was locked, the wood warped with age. Hiroshi frowned. "That hasn't been opened in decades." Emily tugged at Aiko's hand. "Grandma says to open the third one." James exchanged a nervous glance with Aiko. "Maybe we should." "No," Aiko interrupted. Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. "Not here. Not now." Emily began to cry, her small fists pounding on the cupboard door. "You have to open it." Later that evening, Aiko couldn't sleep. Emily's words echoed in her mind. She made her way to the temple alone, flashlight in hand. The cupboard creaked as she forced it open. Inside were stacks of old albums, their pages yellowed with age. She opened the third one, her hands trembling. The first page stopped her cold. There was a photograph of her mother, Miko, smiling brightly. She was surrounded by other people, some of whom Aiko didn't recognize. But it wasn't the photograph that unsettled her. It was the note tucked inside. The cycle must be broken. The note in the album haunted Aiko. The cycle must be broken. It was written in her mother's handwriting, unmistakably hers. Aiko ran her fingers over the faded ink, her chest tightening with unease. Back at the house, James was waiting for her, his arms crossed. "Where did you go?" he asked, his voice sharp with worry. "I needed to see what was in that cupboard," she replied, holding up the album. "Look at this." James flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "It's just old photos. What's so strange about that?" Aiko tapped the note. "This. My mother wrote it, but I have no idea what she meant." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Aiko, I know this is hard for you, but maybe you're overthinking. It's just an old note." But Aiko couldn't let it go. The cryptic message, combined with Emily's uncanny behavior, gnawed at her. She decided to visit her father, Hiroshi, in his study. Hiroshi was sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and books. He looked up as Aiko entered, his face lined with fatigue. "Father," Aiko began, placing the album on the desk. "Do you know what this means?" Hiroshi's expression darkened as he read the note. He closed the album abruptly and shook his head. "It's nothing. Forget about it." "Nothing?" Emily knew about this cupboard. She knew where to look. Aiko's voice cracked. Hiroshi stood, his demeanor suddenly cold. "You should focus on your family, Aiko. Some things are better left in the past." Frustrated, Aiko stormed out. James found her pacing in the hallway. "What's wrong?" he asked. "My father is hiding something," she replied, her voice trembling. "I can feel it." Over the next few days, Emily's behavior became more erratic. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, pointing to the corners of the room and insisting that Grandma was there. "She's angry," Emily whispered one night, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Angry about what?" James asked, his patience wearing thin. Emily didn't answer. She simply stared at him, her eyes wide and unblinking. Aiko decided it was time to dig deeper. She began sifting through old documents and photos stored in her father's house, searching for anything that could explain the note or Emily's strange connection to her grandmother. Aiko's search led her to a locked chest in the attic. She remembered it from her childhood. Her mother had always kept it locked, forbidding anyone from opening it. With a sense of urgency, Aiko found a key in her mother's old jewelry box and unlocked the chest. Inside were letters, journals, and photographs. One journal caught her eye. It was her mother's. As she flipped through the pages, Aiko felt a chill run down her spine. The entry spoke of rituals held at the temple, of a cycle that needed to be maintained to protect the family. There were mentions of cupboards and offerings, but the details were vague. One passage stood out. "The children are the key. They see what we cannot. But at what cost?" Aiko closed the journal, her hands shaking. Aiko confronted Hiroshi again, this time with the journal in hand. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "What cycle? What did Mother mean by, 'the children are the key'?" Hiroshi's face turned ashen. He sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping under the weight of an unspoken burden. "Aiko," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are things about our family, about the temple, that you don't understand." "Then explain it to me," she snapped. Hiroshi hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Our family has tended that temple for generations. There are traditions, rituals that we followed to honor our ancestors. Your mother took them very seriously." "What kind of rituals?" Aiko pressed. Hiroshi shook his head. "I don't know everything. Your mother kept some things from me, too." But she believed that the cycle had to continue, or there would be consequences. Consequences? Aiko echoed, her voice rising. I don't know what she meant, Hiroshi shouted, his frustration spilling over. All I know is that she was terrified of breaking the cycle. That night, Emily disappeared. James and Aiko searched the house frantically, calling her name. They found the front door ajar and muddy footprints leading out into the garden. She's gone to the temple, Aiko said, a sinking feeling in her chest. When they arrived at the temple, they found Emily standing in front of the cupboard, her small hands resting on the third door. She's here, Emily said, her voice eerily calm. She wants us to listen. Aiko and James exchanged a panicked glance. Emily, James said, his voice shaking. Come here. But Emily didn't move. She opened the cupboard, revealing an empty space. Then she turned to Aiko and said, It's time. Behind the cupboard was a hidden door. Aiko had never noticed it before, and Hiroshi had never mentioned it. Grandma says we have to go in, Emily said, stepping back to let Aiko and James see. James hesitated, but Aiko's curiosity and fear drove her forward. She pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With a flashlight in hand, the family descended into the hidden chamber. The air was damp, and the walls were lined with old wooden shelves holding jars and boxes covered in dust. At the center of the room was a stone altar. On it lay a small wooden box, its lid carved with intricate patterns. What is this? James whispered. I don't know, Aiko replied, her voice trembling. Emily walked up to the altar and pointed at the box. Grandma says to open it. Aiko hesitated, her hands hovering over the lid. When she finally opened it, she gasped. Inside were strands of hair, pressed flowers, and another note in her mother's handwriting. The truth is here, but are you ready to face it? The atmosphere in the hidden chamber grew heavier with each passing moment. Aiko stared at the note, her mother's handwriting almost taunting her with its ambiguity. The truth is here, but are you ready to face it? James stood beside her, his flashlight trembling slightly. We need to leave, he urged, but Aiko shook her head. Not yet. I need to know what this means. Emily remained eerily calm, her small hand clutching Aiko's arm. Grandma says you'll understand soon, she whispered, her voice unnervingly confident for a child her age. Aiko set the note aside and began inspecting the contents of the wooden box. Beneath the strands of hair and pressed flowers lay a folded piece of paper. She opened it carefully, revealing a map of the temple grounds. A single red circle marked a spot behind the main shrine. Despite James's protests, Aiko insisted on investigating the marked location. They exited the hidden chamber, Emily leading the way as though she already knew the path. The moon cast a cold light over the temple grounds as they reached the area behind the shrine. The marked spot was a patch of earth that seemed unremarkable at first glance. We're not digging, James said firmly, crossing his arms. This has gone too far. We have to, Aiko replied, her voice resolute. She found a rusted spade near the shrine and began to dig. The soil was dense and heavy, each shovelful feeling like an eternity. Just as James was about to stop her, the spade hit something solid. Aiko knelt down and began brushing away the dirt with her hands, revealing a small, weathered wooden chest. The chest was locked, but the key from the attic fit perfectly. Inside were several items: an old photograph, a bundle of letters, and a locket. Aiko picked up the photograph first. It was a family portrait taken decades ago. She recognized her grandmother, but the man standing beside her wasn't her grandfather. She turned to the letters, her hands trembling as she unfolded the first one. The writing was her grandmother's, and it told a story Aiko had never heard before. A story of betrayal, forbidden love, and a child lost to time. The letters revealed that Aiko's grandmother had fallen in love with a man outside the family, a relationship that was strictly forbidden. When her grandfather discovered the affair, he forced her to give up the child born from it. The child, a boy, had been sent away to an orphanage, never to be seen again. Aiko's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments of the past. Was this boy the key to the cycle her mother had written about? Had her grandmother's actions set something into motion that the family was still grappling with? James, sensing her distress, placed a hand on her shoulder. "What does it mean?" he asked. "I think—" Aiko hesitated, her voice shaking. "I think my grandmother's actions, giving up the child, broke something in our family. The cycle wasn't just a tradition. It was a way to keep our family's history intact, to honor all of its members. By sending him away, she disrupted that balance." Emily, who had been silent until now, pointed at the locket. "Grandma says you should open it." Inside the locket was a tiny black and white photo of a baby and an inscription. "To my dearest son." Determined to uncover the full truth, Aiko confronted Hiroshi once more, bringing the letters and locket with her. Hiroshi's face paled as he read the letters. "I knew your mother was obsessed with maintaining the cycle," he admitted. "But I didn't know about this, about the child. She was trying to fix what Grandma had broken," Aiko realized. "That's why she left that note. She wanted me to finish what she started." Hiroshi nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "But at what cost, Aiko? Some things are better left buried." Aiko wasn't convinced. She felt an overwhelming need to find the missing piece of her family's history. The letters contained a name. Akihiko, the boy given up by Aiko's grandmother. Aiko began her search, using every resource available to track him down. Weeks turned into months, and just as Aiko was about to give up, she found a lead. An elderly man named Akihiko Yamada, living in a small coastal town, matched the description in the letters. Aiko decided to visit him, taking James and Emily with her. Akihiko was frail but sharp-minded. When Aiko showed him the photograph and letters, tears welled up in his eyes. "I always wondered about my family," he said softly. "I thought they had forgotten me." As they talked, Aiko felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time, the pieces of her family's fractured history began to come together. Akihiko agreed to visit the temple with them, to honor the family he had been taken from. Back at the temple, Aiko organized a small ceremony to acknowledge Akihiko's place in the family. Hiroshi, initially reluctant, eventually agreed to participate. As they stood before the shrine, Aiko felt a sense of peace wash over her. The cycle, it seemed, had finally been mended. Emily, standing beside her, smiled and said, "Grandma is happy now." The strange occurrences around Emily ceased after the ceremony. She returned to being a normal, playful child, and the family felt a newfound sense of unity. Aiko often thought about her mother and grandmother, about the choices they had made and the burdens they had carried. She vowed to keep the family's history alive, to ensure that their stories were never forgotten. And as she watched Emily play in the garden, Aiko knew that the cycle had truly been broken, not by rituals or traditions, but by love and understanding.